I come to you from the land of the dead to tell you my story. Let it serve as a warning so that when you reach the same fork in the road that I faced, you may make the right decision and continue to dwell in the land of the living. Things really started falling apart when I graduated from art school this past May. My boyfriend had, for a long time, been urging me to see a doctor about my menstrual lapse. I hadn't gotten a period for about 2 years. I kept pushing it off, using my busy school schedule as an excuse. When classes had nearly wound down, I mentioned my problem to my mother, who had been vaguely aware of it for some time. Because of some weight loss I had recently undergone, this sent her into a panic, and she had me immediately make an appointment with her endocrinologist. This marks the beginning of what I call the medical era. The endocrinologist sent me on a bevy of blood tests and, one by one, ruled out every medical condition in which a girl loses her period. Finally, he settled on my weight and eating habits as the only possible cause. I had lost a fair amount of weight during my senior year at Cooper Union, but only because of an incidentally more active routine and sparser diet, not through a deliberate attempt to lose weight. He had me list for him everything I ate in a typical day, and later, in my absence, he told my parents that I was anorexic. I argued my case to them, but the seed of fear was already planted in their hearts. Several weeks after I began my medical quest, my boyfriend broke up with me. For several months or even longer, he had grown tired of trying to be my psychologist, trying to make me see why I do the things I do. He felt I had grown blind to my own motives in life. My most persistent dilemma after having been left was whether I should figure out where I was in the wrong, analyze the events and conversations leading up to the breakup until I understood my lesson, or to just say, screw it, I'm not in a relationship anymore, I don't have to answer to anyone. Sensing that the tendency to constantly pick apart my own motivations was a survival tactic I adopted in response to my relationship with Cole, I decided the healthiest thing for me would be to abandon this unhealthy self-scrutiny for a while. In the absence of more dominant preoccupations, my medical issues quickly became the source of meaning in my life. In fact, during certain weeks as a recent graduate, when I had several doctor's appointments scheduled, I wondered how I would have filled my spare time if not for them. One day, I was called up by my gynecologist and told that the sonogram I took a month earlier revealed I had a large ovarian cyst, 2 lumps that, when combined, equaled the volume of a large mango. Shortly thereafter, my mother and I scheduled surgery for August 16th at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital. Besides the predictable discomforts involved, the operation was a positive experience for me. I appreciated the ceremoniousness of surgery, the rigorous bowel cleanse preceding my check-in, changing into hospital clothes, the handsome male nurse gingerly applying the IV, being wheeled around in a bed, giving myself and my consciousness up to a team of capable professionals. Even coming out of the sleeping drugs, I was immediately aware of having undergone some kind of exorcism. Though the cysts never caused me any discomfort before, a well-being filled me after they were removed, as if I was relieved of some evil presence. However, this euphoria wore off after a few weeks, and as the scars took their place, it was replaced by fear. With numerous doctors targeting my weight as the root of my problem, my parents began to harp on it incessantly. For the first time in my life, I liked the way I looked, and I felt myself at odds with my parents over my own body. One day, doing some office work on the computer at home, I discovered my father was consulting through email with an acquaintance of his from California, whose daughter had died of bulimia, and who had written a book about her experience. In her reply, his friend had told him that his description reminded her of her own deceased daughter. I decided to scrutinize more seriously my attitudes towards food. I agreed to read her book and discovered that, though I didn't vomit or starve myself or binge, I did in fact possess attitudes that characterize anorexics. I started bi-weekly visits with a nutritionist at the Whole Heart Center in Manhattan. At her suggestion, I tried acupuncture in Chinatown for 2 months. My mother, always an open-minded accomplice, took me to a rundown neighborhood of New Jersey to see a Haitian herbalist her friend recommended. He used a special camera to photograph my irises and then consulted a battered wall chart to read where my trouble spots were. In a 15-minute session, he read my body by rhythmically tapping and brushing my knee while rubbing his own. Apparently, I had a traumatic fall as a child that hurt my thyroid functioning. I had used up my reserves of iodine. That's why my period stopped. I had to build it up again. He divined that my birth was a traumatic one, cesarean. I asked him how to prevent my cysts from growing back. He said if he told me, I'd never believe it. What? I asked. You have to believe in the Son of God. I asked him what my options were short of believing in the Son of God. He gave me a detailed prescription for a 3-month-long regimen that included a 2-week cleanse from toxins and scores of herbal pills, which I had the option of buying at the front desk. With warm Haitian smugness, he assured me that my body told him my period would return within 3 months if I followed the regimen. I adhered to it diligently. For stretches of time I had to be discreet, like after my aunt flipped out on my mother and me for going to a voodoo doctor instead of taking birth control like the fancy fertility specialist told me months ago. She didn't understand that for me to take the pill was to admit defeat. On several occasions, when I was overwhelmed with feelings, I started long diary entries, and a few times, in a flash of inspiration, I had my friends film me. These shots were to be the starting footage for some kind of cathartic video monologue. However, just as the creative bursts came, the momentum would fizzle away. I couldn't see the light at the end of my troubles, and so I felt that my artistic endeavors were nothing more than gratuitous efforts to outrun my feelings of worthlessness. My mother took it upon herself to heal my soul. She consulted with her brother, a very faithful and trusted religious authority in his neighborhood in Israel, and he compiled a regimen of Jewish rituals for me to follow, including libations in the morning, prayers, and psalm readings. I didn't get much out of the readings, not even the relief that accompanies a placebo, but I persisted for several months in following a very abridged version of the regimen, knowing that it was the faith, after all, that was what would heal me. I took a month-long vacation in Israel to visit my grandmother and relatives. The period leading up to the flight was the closest I came to a sense of optimism since my troubles began. I had been working on a project for my dad, a psychology video for kids called Victim Proof Your School. Throughout the month and a half leading up to my vacation in Israel, I worked in top gear to edit the footage, determined to accomplish enough to set my mind at ease during my visit. The feeling that I was finally making progress, combined with the excitement over my upcoming trip, left me not quite euphoric, but as close as I had been to it in a long time. I brought my laptop and external hard drive with me to Israel, and that first night at my grandmother's house, to pass the jet lag hours, I took them out to work. When I plugged them in, to my horror, my PowerBook no longer recognized the files on the external hard drive. Those hours I passed lying in bed awake, trying to reassure myself, were some of the darkest and emptiest hours I can recall. I knew full well that chances were that I had lost countless hours of precious work, a meaningless disaster that I could not digest. That month in Israel was an exercise in imposed tranquility. My grandmother, with the same fervor for healing me as my own mother, took me within the first week to a Yemenite healer, a relative in a town not too far away who had helped girls through massage. I was moved by the sincerity of her loving care, a woman I had never met before, and her old world faith in God's healing power, but I could not draw lasting reassurance from it, just as I couldn't from the months of acupuncture I had done in the city and from the treatment at the Haitian medicine man in New Jersey. The term that had come to my mind to describe my life after graduation was the afterlife. With each passing day, it seemed to become more and more fitting. Surrounded though I was by the deep spirituality of my relatives in Israel, I could not channel any of it into my own life. As an artist, my urge was to find some meaning in my loss, create something positive from something negative. But this time, the blows were just too great. One night in Jerusalem, I had a long conversation with a friend, Oren, who was about to earn his master's in cognitive psychology. I told him about an old childhood friend, Jenny, with whom I had met up earlier that day. Jenny had attended Jewish day school with me, but unlike me, she continued with it until the end of high school. Afterwards, she half-heartedly started studies at the College of Staten Island, and soon became involved with a Catholic boy named Jamie. That turbulent relationship, and the turbulence it caused at home, lasted 2 years. Now, 2 years later, Jenny was studying in a Jewish seminary in Jerusalem, causing totally different waves back home. She had become strictly observant, and was well on her way towards marrying a born-again Jew with whom she had been matched. Upon meeting up with her, I was delighted to find her more ebullient than I had ever known her. She reminded me of the person I once was when she said that she no longer feels any serious fear or anger, because she knows that everything that happened was destined from on high. After listening to my story, Oren pressed me for more details. Was it possible I was utterly devoid of faith? In reply, I told him that I no longer have faith I'll find true love, I no longer have faith that I'm destined for great things, and most upsettingly, I lost my fundamental ability as an artist to find some underlying order to what we see around us. "What's it like?" he asked me. I told him it's a scary and lonely place. This was something he couldn't accept. He was adamant that freedom from these illusions was a superior state. Furthermore, he insisted, I couldn't will myself into believing, even if I wanted to. He spent the rest of the night explaining to me his theory of consciousness. In it, everyone lives out his own story, a story which he composed to explain the state of his existence. Only when the circumstances of life become overwhelming, and the story can no longer explain the person's condition, does he undergo a crisis. Then he drifts for a while, until he finds a new story. I argued with him over how one can accept that there exists a multiplicity of stories, and yet happily live in one himself. I insisted that it followed from his theory that, if I wanted to, I could will myself back into faith, out of sheer certainty that that's the best story for me. Oren disagreed, saying that a person can't really pick a story like he picks a hat. He has to reach it through a process of reasoning, peeling away layers like an onion. I expressed to Oren my hope that a person has the power to affect reality through the story he chooses, and not merely to pick a story well suited to his reality. I explained how I've been trying to believe in all the treatments I've been doing to get my period back, knowing somewhere that if I don't believe in them, they won't work on me. Oren was skeptical about metaphysical forces like that, but said that logically, if a person picks a suitable story and follows it through to the end, he's more likely to do good for himself than if he has no story at all. I shared with him a notion that occurred to me a few days earlier. My physical and spiritual descent seemed to begin immediately after a decision I made before graduation to stop making art. Could it be that as a result of my abandonment of creating, God deemed that I should be incapable of the highest creation, life? And if so, wouldn't that mean that the return of my fertility could only come with my return to making art? Oren praised the poetry of my story and wished me luck in finding something I could believe in. I began the process of peeling away layers. What follows is the core as I see it. Faith for me was always inextricably bound up with making art. I attended a Jewish day school from kindergarten till 5th grade, where belief in God dictated the smallest particulars of the curriculum. But at home we were only semi-observant. We kept kosher, and we always observed Sabbath to some degree. Yes, I believed in God, but if practice is what constitutes religion, then my first religion was art. As far back as I can remember, I was a zealous creator. I filled my spare time by making movies, sewing pillows, writing stories, and even fully bound books, and drawing endlessly. I did anything to avoid an idle moment. I can recall, even as a child, occasionally falling despondent during periods when I felt insufficiently productive. I lived from one project to the next. 5th grade is the first time I remember getting attention from my peers for my talent at drawing. In all likelihood, I was noticed long before then, but this period stands out in my memory because it's when my parents moved me to public school, and I was so alone and out of place that attention was one of the few redeeming lights in my life. One of my few good memories from school was of the most popular girl in class asking me to draw her a picture of Garfield. As I recall, I did it that very night. I started taking the school's art class, first once, then 3 times a week. With the encouragement of my teacher, Mrs. Nissel, and my parents, and the attention of my classmates, I very quickly became a precocious draftsman. I went to LaGuardia, a special high school for art in Manhattan, and among many other young artists, my passion and sophistication grew. I was accepted to Cooper Union, a very exclusive school for art, and it was there that I discovered movie making, or rather rediscovered it. It had been my favorite activity between the ages of 10 and 14 when I made videos with all my closest friends in our basement, using a boxy VHS camera. As film and video courses gradually filled my entire schedule, my brand of faith took on the cloak of cinematic terminology. All of life is a long film, and every event is a crucial plot element. Even when I underwent hardship, there was a placidity flowing underneath that stemmed from the belief that the harder the obstacles now, the better the outcomes. This faith, in turn, fueled my art. Sometimes moments of inspiration were few and far between, but they always came, because the world was a masterpiece. It just had to be manifested. Around sophomore year, I was exposed to postmodernism. It was a philosophy that thrilled me and fueled my work. My videos gained a certain self-awareness and, I think, shed their naivete. Through making videos that addressed their making and revealed their maker, I could expose my most personal experience and thereby connect with my audience in a way that I never had before. My orthodoxy regarding postmodernism was such that I had no patience for any artwork which, in my opinion, required a pamphlet and an explanation to be appreciated, which didn't aim solely to express the maker's personal experience. I think the apex of this kind of faith was during the first semester of my senior year, when I was editing a video I had shot while studying in Israel for a semester the previous year. It was a video about my grandmother's past, her childhood in Yemen up until her immigration to Israel as a young mother. The stories were told through video interviews with her, reenacted by my relatives in costume, and shot on black and white Super 8 film. It was only when I was back in school the next year and starting to transfer the film to editable video that I discovered I had lost some of my Super 8 film during shooting. At first, the loss was inconceivable to me. For a few days after I had projected every roll of film in my possession, I persisted in believing that I had actually seen the missing footage among it. I could so lucidly visualize every shot in question that I figured it must be among my rolls, and I just forgot. But upon the second and third projections, the truth set in. I believe that what followed was very similar to a mourning process. The dramatic reenactments of my grandmother's life, carried out by my family, were so precious to me that it was hard to pick myself up after the blow. But I finally did, and in the only way I knew how, turned catastrophe into providence. I meditated on the pain I experienced over the lost film and realized that it was a most fitting symbol for the fear of loss that I saw as the major theme of the film. In viewing all my footage, I realized that nostalgia, obsession with the good old days, fear of a changing world, were what drove me to make the film. And the subject of the film, my grandmother, was a poignant counterpoint, a brave, worldly old woman who views the past as past and her hardships as a matter of fact, rather than an epic drama. I decided that I would somehow weave the story of the lost footage into the film, as a symbol of my fixation as a filmmaker on the possibility of preserving something which will inevitably be lost. I decided to edit my movie to look like an archived Hollywood film, of which sections were destroyed or eroded and replaced with descriptive intertitles. Postmodernism had once again rescued me from senseless tragedy. But the feedback during the group critiques was consistently negative. It took me several rough cuts to reconcile with the fact that my audiences just didn't like being reminded of what's missing. They just wanted to see the story. It was only after a long talk with my boyfriend at the time that I realized the current structure was actually undermining my intentions. By giving such weight to the missing film, I was actually taking attention away from the subject and suggesting that my main concern was not my grandmother. The first rough cut, which treated the story as if there was no film missing, received remarkably better responses. So I continued down that path, and the final version, which I screened in the great hall of my school as my senior project, was not what I once thought it could be, but it was the grandest thing I had done till that point. It's also the first time in which I compromised between my artistic vision and the desires of my audience. The positive reception of the film made my reservations easy to repress, but deep inside, I was profoundly disillusioned. The loss of my Super 8 film could not be given artistic meaning. Apparently, some disasters were just that, disasters, and nothing good could be made of them. Coinciding with the fine editing of the film during my senior year was a secondary project. I had found myself with almost a whole year to go and no ideas for art projects. I stepped back, thought to myself, what is a hard-working art student to do when she has no art to make? And I decided that the only logical step is to do the work of those who do have art to make. I put up flyers around my school advertising my free help to any art student who could use it. I got a trickle of respondents and documented each job I did. This manual labor for my fellow students was the only other art I was doing during the editing of the documentary about my grandmother. But throughout it all, I was reflecting deeply and experienced a revelation. The reason I had started making art in the first place was to gain approval from those around me. Suddenly, I saw all of my past creations in the new light of my low self-esteem. Before long, the entire art school institution became implicated in this ego-driven rat race. Who said it was right to judge people based on their intellectual creations anyway? Relinquishing the right to make art became a personal crusade, and I secretly considered myself a bold critic of the special status given to artists. I presented the documentation of this voluntary work project in PowerPoint form to my professor. Simultaneously, I gave a speech which argued for the validity of doing the manual labor for other people's art as a way of earning credits in art school. In my case, 3 credits that were crucial for me to graduate. In effect, I also declared that from here on forward, I would shed the title of artist. I would stop creating art, and I would find out who I really was underneath. I filmed this PowerPoint presentation and called it, appropriately, my last art project. My boyfriend was nervous throughout this entire process. He was suspicious of the absolutism of my decision, and argued that I should examine closely why I suddenly feel art to be so burdensome. He himself is a musician, so I took his discomfort with my decision as a sign that he felt his own livelihood was being threatened. I insisted to Cole repeatedly that this was about me finding an authentic and lasting happiness. My last art project turned out to be the perfect work of art with which to end my time at Cooper Union. Not only did it nicely sum up 4 years of art schooling and showcase many of my classmates and their creative practices, it was wonderfully postmodern and argued against the very paradigm which created it. But it was still a work of art, 13 minutes on a videotape that I showed in a critique, and for which I got feedback, almost unanimously positive feedback, I might add. The trouble started right around graduation. The irony in my parting statement became lost on me, and I stepped into the story I had told. Or rather, I stepped out of a story entirely, because my building obsession was with living life rather than recording it. In the beginning of the summer, when the doctors first advised me that something was wrong, I did not believe them. Quite the contrary. I had not had my period for a few years, and unhampered by that monthly Achilles heel, I felt like something of a superwoman. The doctor's visits for a long while were merely an inconvenience to be tolerated for my mother's sake. However, there was a discrete moment in time, after the diagnosis and long after the symptoms first appeared, when I stopped being a healthy woman and became a sick woman. Similarly, when I first started reading the Shema and the Psalms, it was in order to put my mother's soul at ease. Only later did I become obsessed with my loss of faith. Though I tried to reassure my parents by augmenting my diet, I stubbornly resisted their suggestions that I have an eating disorder. At some point, however, I could no longer look in the mirror approvingly without simultaneously feeling that I was measuring myself against the unhealthy standards set by the media. For a long time, I had been particular about the healthfulness of what I put in my body. Now, my choosiness was obsession. For years, I had been diligent about regular exercise. Now I was neurotic. Refusing to write my own script, life quickly stepped up to do it for me. Even my breakup with my boyfriend of over 2 years, by its very nature, resisted being put into a story. When Cole had left, a part of me breathed a sigh of relief. I no longer had to be subject to his criticisms, his judgments, his scrutiny. But in the absence of this last looking glass constantly by my side, the world became quite a bit darker and more bewildering. The events I've described have all culminated. Since then, much has transpired, but I can't seem to make sense of it. After making up all the work I had lost on my ruined hard drive, my second hard drive fell off a table. The contents were unrecoverable. I'm on the pill. I haven't found God. I haven't even found art. I would go on, but it would seem like the incoherent and bewildering muddle of details that we know of as real life. And this is supposed to be art. I have revised this piece every few weeks for a long time, trying to update it according to the latest developments in my health, my professional life, my family life, but I was never satisfied. I never had that eureka moment that accompanies all of my previous artworks, because I didn't know ultimately what the message was. So I've abandoned a message. Let this film serve as a warning to all of you art students about to leave the gallery and enter the blinding light of the real world. Don't question why you make art. Don't question its usefulness. Yes, you're addicted to the attention, to the approval, but only in the same way that we're addicted to the blood pumping oxygen to our vital organs. Don't stop, because if you do, I'm not sure you can return.